Have I ever told you the story of Roy Sullivan, the Spark Ranger? Roy was born in 1912 in Greene County, Virginia, in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Little Roy grew up to be a big, brawny man who loved the great outdoors. And when he turned 24, he got a job as a park ranger at the Shenandoah National Park. Roy's first 6 years on the job went by relatively smoothly, with nothing particularly shocking going on, until one day, in April of 1942, there was a terrible thunderstorm, and Roy was hiding out in one of the park's fire lookout towers. Now, in case you didn't know, fire lookout towers are big, tall towers where forest rangers can get a clear view of the park, so they can look out for fires. And because the towers are the tallest things around, they're at a great risk of lightning strikes. That's why any good lookout tower is equipped with a lightning rod. They allow the electric charge from the clouds to flow safely to the ground, so the tower doesn't receive a giant shock. Well, unfortunately for Roy, he was hiding in a tower that had just been built, and there wasn't any lightning rod. You can guess what happened next. That's right. Lightning struck the tower. And you know that old saying, lightning never strikes the same place twice? Well, that might be true, because it didn't strike twice. It struck the tower 8 times. Inside, Roy said that fire was jumping all over the place. So, obviously, he ran outside to escape it. He only made it a few feet from the landing when... Zap! The lightning bolt hit his leg, traveled down to his left foot, and left a 2-inch burn all along the way. Then it burst out of his shoe and left behind a smoking hole. He was sore and shaken up, but he was otherwise okay. According to the U.S. National Weather Service, an average person has a 1 in 15,300 chance of being struck by lightning once in their lifetime. But Roy wasn't an average person. He was a rough and rugged park ranger who spent most of his working life outdoors. So it's not too terribly surprising that a guy like Roy would have a run-in with lightning. But nobody's unlucky enough to be struck by lightning more than once, right? Well, let me tell you what happened in July of 1969. Roy was hard at work, still with the same job as a park ranger. It had been 27 years since Roy's first lightning strike, and the memory of it was probably far in the back of his mind. He glanced up at the sky and saw a storm brewing, but he wasn't worried about lightning this time. Why not? Because Roy was in a truck. Now, in case you didn't know, a motor vehicle is pretty much just a big metal cage that can direct the electricity currents around the people inside, instead of through their bodies. Metal cages like this, or even metal suits, are used all the time to protect workers repairing power lines or backyard scientists doing dangerous experiments. A guy called Faraday came up with it, so it's known as a Faraday cage. So Roy had no reason to expect another lightning strike. But he was in for a shock. You see, a key difference between an actual Faraday cage and a truck is that a truck has windows, and Roy's window happened to be open. In a flash, a bolt of lightning hit a tree and then deflected into Roy's open window and struck him in the head. The strike burned off his eyelashes and his eyebrows and set his hair on fire. Even worse, Roy was knocked unconscious, and his truck was still rolling out of control down the mountain. Fortunately, though, by sheer luck, the truck rolled to a stop just short of the edge of a cliff. He was burned and bald, but he was alive. Being struck by lightning twice meant that Roy was quite an unlucky guy. But this story is just getting started. One day, about a year later, Roy was hanging out in his front yard when a bolt of lightning suddenly struck a nearby power transformer, then jumped to hit Roy in his left shoulder. Now, in case you didn't know, lightning bolts are hot. I mean, really, really hot. I mean, literally 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. So even though the strike only lasted a few microseconds, it seared Roy's shoulder like a barbecued steak. But again, Roy walked away relatively unharmed. Being struck 3 times by lightning is extremely unlucky, but Roy was fortunate to have walked away from them all in one piece. According to National Geographic magazine, lightning strikes kill around 2,000 people worldwide each year, and although 9 out of 10 lightning victims survive, they're likely to suffer from long-lasting ailments like memory loss or chronic dizziness. Roy had been rudely reminded of the ruthless wrath of nature, and he vowed to take great precaution around thunderstorms from then on. He didn't have to worry about any lightning strikes after that, for about 2 years. Then, one day in 1972, Roy was at work in a ranger station during another thunderstorm. Now, in case you didn't know, lightning is unpredictable. Sure, lightning rods and Faraday cages can help keep you safe, but only if they're properly maintained. Lightning can still find its way into a house or a ranger station through ventilation systems, water pipes, phone lines, wires, and even concrete if there's steel rebar inside. So even though Roy was indoors, the lightning somehow found him. The lightning ignited Roy's hair, again, and he tried putting it out with his jacket. But that didn't seem to work, so he ran to the bathroom sink and tried to get his hair under the faucet, but his big ol' head wouldn't fit. So he grabbed a towel, got it wet, and covered his head, finally extinguishing the flames. At this point, Roy's friends and coworkers started to suspect there was something going on with Roy and lightning. They called him names like the Spark Ranger or the Human Lightning Rod. And they would always avoid being in the same place as Roy if there was any risk of lightning. One of Roy's colleagues, Robert Jacobson, told one reporter that a long-standing rule in the park was that if you see a dark cloud heading your way, get away from Roy Sullivan. As a rough and rugged park ranger, Roy was never described as fearful or cowardly, but 4 lightning strikes had filled him with an inescapable sense of dread, like someone was out to get him. He would break into a nervous sweat whenever he saw dark clouds. If he was driving and it started to rain, he would immediately pull over and lay on his seat until the storm passed. And since these strikes often resulted in Roy's hair being set on fire, he started carrying a jug of water with him everywhere he went. You know, just in case. The next summer, Roy was doing his routine patrol in the park when he heard the low clap of thunder. Now, in case you didn't know, lightning travels far. And if you're close enough to hear the sound of thunder, then you could be in range of lightning. Lightning can strike up to 10 kilometers away, and its crack of thunder can be heard from just as far. Experts recommend you follow the 30-30 rule. When you see lightning, start counting seconds. If you hear thunder before you count to 30, you'd better seek shelter and stay there for 30 minutes after the last thunderclap. But Roy didn't need to count even 1 second. He immediately hopped into his truck and hightailed it, trying to get as much distance between him and the storm as possible. As he drove, he saw the cloud in his mirrors, looming larger and larger in view. It seemed to be following him. Roy mashed his foot on the gas and sped along the twisting roads with the menacing storm cloud in hot pursuit. Gradually, the storm faded and the skies seemed to brighten. And Roy figured he had put enough distance between himself and the cloud, and so decided it was safe to stop and get out. Before he could even breathe a sigh of relief, this time, Roy could actually see the bolt that hit him. It struck his left arm, traveled down his left leg, and knocked his shoe clean off. The lightning transferred from his left foot to his right foot and stopped just below the knee. Roy was still conscious, but he couldn't walk. He crawled like a snake to the open door of his truck, grabbed his water jug, and poured it all over his head, because it was on fire. The very next year, on June 5th, Roy was on foot, traversing a hiking trail, when he saw an ominous dark cloud. He ran in the opposite direction, but was no match. This time, the lightning struck his ankle, traveled up his body, and ignited his hair. Again. Roy's final encounter with lightning came just a year later. It was a lovely summer Saturday, and Roy decided to visit his favorite fishing spot. As he cast his line and settled down to wait for a bite, a dark cloud loomed over him. Now, in case you didn't know, when a lightning strike is imminent, the air will fill with static energy. It will start to taste funny, like you've been licking a battery. Nearby metal objects will begin buzzing, and your hairs will stand on end. The lightning struck the top of his head, setting it on fire, of course, and traveled down his chest and stomach, leaving behind some painful burns. After quickly extinguishing his head, Roy turned to see something unexpected. A bear was approaching the pond, trying to steal the fish from his fishing line. Well, this was the last straw for Roy. Mother Nature had struck him down with lightning 7 times, burned his hair, scarred his body, and tormented him to the brink of insanity. But she would not steal his lunch. Roy picked up a tree branch and charged the bear, screaming and hitting it until the startled beast ran away. This was Roy's 7th lightning strike, but it was the 22nd time he had hit a bear with a stick. Oh, did I forget to mention that? Yeah, I guess I was distracted by all the lightning strikes, but besides all that, when Roy wasn't being electrocuted, he was out hitting bears with tree branches. He did it 22 times! How is it that a guy fights 22 bears, and that's not even the most interesting thing about him? Well, anyway, that's the story of Roy Sullivan, the Spark Ranger. For all his trouble, Roy got his name in the Guinness Book of World Records for most lightning strikes survived. You know, unfortunately, Guinness doesn't have a record for most times fighting a wild bear with a tree branch, because Roy might have gotten that one too.